guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. So today we've got another minimal house banger for you. This time we're going to be looking at tracks in the style of recent releases from Rossi, ANOTR, Tomin, labels like Rossi's new Homegrown, Another's label No Art, this type of thing. I've noticed recently a trend in the minimal scene that some artists are starting to use some more kind of housey throwback sounds, using drum break samples and kind of incorporating some of the sounds of like early house, early rave kind of stuff. It's really fun and really cool. The track you can hear playing right now is my new track Pranayama on owauauGEAR. If you like how it sounds, there's a link in the description if you want to stream it on Spotify or grab a copy on Beatport. It's doing pretty well in the deep house charts. Thanks so much, I appreciate all of the support. Like always, you can grab the project files from this video, link in the description to my Patreon. There you'll find the Ableton Live project for this video and all of my other How to Sound Like videos. It's a really good way to consolidate the learning and helps to support the channel. Now let's get into Ableton and make some groovy minimal house. Alright, so here we are inside Ableton, and this is the project that I've put together for this groovy minimal house. For this project specifically, I really listened and paid close attention to Rossi's new EP on his Homegrown label. Really, really cool EP, I love it a lot. It's got the minimal aesthetic that you'd expect from releases on Fuse London, Locus, EastEnders, that type of thing, but he's really incorporated throwback elements and a bit more kind of classic house stuff. Really fun, good time party music. So anyway, let's take a quick listen through and then we'll get into it. There we go, some kind of housey minimal business. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. How does it sound? Like we always do, let's start with the drums and we'll jump straight in with the kick. So for the kick, I just went for the simplest method, which is sampling something from one of Rossi's tracks. I've got a video which I'll link up here. I'll show you in more detail about how I go about sampling kicks, getting a really clean sample. But let's just take a listen. Nice, warm and punchy. It's got enough click that it cuts through the mix, but it's still pretty deep and subby. So if I take off this filter, like I said, it's sampled. So I'm just filtering it down to 200 Hertz, and then in the envelope control, the envelope amount all the way up, and just a really tight decay. So it just gets rid of any of those artifacts. Now the kick's just playing a basic 4/4 pattern over 8 bars, and then on the end of the 8 bars we've just got this double kick, and you'll see here in the MIDI I just shortened this one, and then this one has a little bit lower velocity and is a bit shorter. Basically that's so that the kicks don't kind of run into each other and create a build up in the low frequency. So it still gives the desired effect of like this little rolling kick fill, but without causing the problems in the mix and like the limiter getting triggered, and yeah. One other thing to note is I'm basically doing like a kick fill here, acting like an effect sound. So you can see here, if I pull this velocity up, as these kicks get more and more frequent, I'm bringing the velocity down and they're getting shorter as well. On the simpler, I've got the sustain all the way up and a bit of release. So that means that it's going to play as long as the MIDI note's held, and then it's going to release a little bit. So that's going to stop the kicks from running into each other, and it's also going to stop any clicks that could occur if the release was too short. So that is the kick. Let's have a look at the claps. I've got 2 claps grouped together. Just your standard clap pattern, playing on every second beat. One is a kind of classic drum machine, and the other is kind of somewhere between a snare and a hand clap. It's quite a cool sound, but they complement each other quite well. I've just panned 110 to the left and 110 to the right, just to spread them out a little bit. On the EQ, I've just cut out all the lows. The envelopes, I've got them quite short and snappy. I've got some processing on these. This glue compressor is pulling down the volume after the initial transient, and this is to accentuate that snappy effect, that snappy sound that I want. Now I've got this saturator, and this is acting as a soft clipper. See, I've got the soft clip turn on, and I've got this drive way up, and then I've got the output way down. I'll take off this reverb. Actually, I'll take off the saturator. So, glue compressor. It's subtle, but it's just making them a little bit tighter. Now, let's look at the volume here on this track. So we're getting minus 21.7 dB. Now, when I turn the saturator on, you can listen. It sounds about the same, but this peak volume is going to reduce quite a lot. So that's almost 10 dBs, like 8 dBs, right? In reduction. 21.7 down to 30.3, but it sounds audibly about the same. What I'm going to show you now, turn that off. Now I'll look at the master on this oscilloscope, right? So that's the waveform of the clap. Now if I press Command Z to undo turning the saturator off, now we'll see what the saturated signal looks like. So we've just kind of shaved off that transient, but it's not really affecting the sound of the clap. So this is basically going to give us more headroom to have our claps a bit louder without triggering the limiter on the master. I noticed in a lot of the tracks that I referenced, the claps were pretty loud. And I know from my experience mixing that that can cause real problems when you've got a loud clap and it's triggering a limiter on the master, and that limiter is squeezing down on the full track. So I want to avoid that by not adding too much volume on the clap, but I want the effect of a nice loud clap. So that's what we're getting here. Now I've got a reverb. Pretty subtle, interesting stuff on this. I've got this pre-delay set to 29.1 milliseconds. So the 29.1 milliseconds is significant. The BPM of the track is 129, and this is very, very close to 1/64th, I believe. So the way you find this out is using a delay time calculator. This is the one I use. It's called Nick Fever, and you enter the BPM of the track, 129, calculate. Now it's going to show us these times in milliseconds. Yeah, so 1/64th of a beat is 29.07 milliseconds. Right, so we've got it set to 29.1. So what's going to happen, there's going to be a delay between when the clap sounds play and when the reverb starts. It's a very, very short delay, but it kind of separates the original sound from the reverb a bit, which has the effect of making the reverb sound quite a bit bigger without it getting too washy. I've got it set to relatively short decay time as well. You can do the pre-delay thing by ear, but I find doing it timed precisely just gives this really, really tight effect on it. Check that out. It's a simple tip that you can use to add some depth to your claps without kind of washing them out or causing anything too chaotic in the groove. We've got this drum break, which I'm using as a fill. I've got some automation on that, just with the volume, bringing it up in volume in the break here. I noticed this was something that Rossi did in a few different tracks, including In Village, I think it is, on Locus, which was a really big record for him. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. The next thing that I've done is taken this last snare from the drum break, right? Then I've added it onto this track, put some overdrive and some reverb, frozen that track, then dragged the audio, which I can redo here. Now I've got a audio sample of the snare from this drum break with reverb over the top. So that sounds like this. Then what I've done is hit reverse, then shortened it, hit A to get the envelope mode, and then just shaped this envelope so that it kind of sucks into itself. And this is the result. Creating a really cool effect sound that comes from an element that exists in the track, so it sounds really cohesive and works well. This is actually being sent through the drum processing, so what I might do is just drag it down to the effects group. I left it in that place as it would make sense as we're going through the tutorial, but I don't actually want it to be processed by the drums because it's got so much reverb on, and all the drum processing is going to be bringing that up. So we've got our kick and clap playing together and the drum break acting as a fill. Cool, now we need some hats, right? So I've got two open hats. This one here is the main one. So it's an open hat, but it's got a pretty tight envelope on it. And some of these notes are lower in velocity and they're a bit shorter, just to give it some groove and accentuate the offbeat hats. The sample sounds like this. So it's quite short, but not short enough. We want it to be really punchy, right? I'm cutting out some of the lows with an EQ, but not too much. In my opinion, you want your hats to have some body. I think once you start EQing them too high, they start to sound thin and brittle and can cause real problems in your mix. Now we've got another open hat. So you notice that that's quite a different timbre and kind of sound to the other hat. I've got them panned slightly. So the second open hat is a bit fizzier, a bit higher, and just adding a bit of sparkle to that first one, which has got quite a sharp attack. On the second hat, I've turned the attack up to 12 milliseconds. So if I take that back down, so it just kind of eases into it rather than having the transient attack on the start. Because we've got plenty of attack from the first hat, this is just to kind of add some texture and some fizz. Again, I'm cutting out the lows, but not too much. This one, as you can see from the EQ, is focused a lot more in the high end. Now, we've got another drum break loop. This is something that I'm hearing a lot in these kind of minimal deep tech tracks, and it works so well. It gives this great texture, this really kind of organic, authentic groove, and this real depth to the drums. Let's have a listen to that drum break. Really cool, and it's got this kind of crowd party sound in the background, which really adds some atmosphere and body to the track. As you can see here, I'm using the envelope modulation to just pull it in a little bit tighter. So we want it to be really kind of tight and skippy, as that's the aesthetic of these kind of tracks, but it's really adding some kind of groove and personality to the track. Let me turn it on. Pretty straight, pretty driving, but quite dry and a bit boring, really. Now if I turn this on, instantly party time, right? Last thing in the hats, I've just got this tambourine loop. Nice kind of housey sound, also adding some groove and personality to the top end. Adds some energy as well because it's sitting quite high in the frequency spectrum. So all in all, like really kind of fun sounding drums. Now we'll move on to the percussion. So what I've got here is two glitch loops. These are basically percussion loops that I took from my sample pack, Underground Shades of House. Link up here if you want to go and grab that. And what I've done is add a tantra onto them with some different presets. This one here. Then after the tantra, I've got an EQ just cutting out some of the kind of low mids and an LFO tool just to duck it on the kick and clap. Then I've got this second one, which I've actually frozen and flattened. The reason I've done that is because I didn't want the whole loop playing. So if we go to the envelope here, so that's just repeating in these other sections. So I didn't want it repeating so frequently. And the reason I've chosen these two is because they're interacting quite well together. They're doing some kind of call and response. So let's have a listen. I did have a third one, which I didn't end up using. Not bad by any means, just wasn't interacting as well as the other two with the other elements in the track. But I will freeze that and include it in the download of the project. Link in the description if you want to grab that. Now I've got this groovy snare, which is you can hear there's a little bit of ping pong delay, which is being done with a send. This is just a ping pong delay from my standard template. Link up here to a video where I explain the whole template, but it's basically just the Ableton ping pong delay, cutting out the lows and sending a little bit to that. So let's take a listen to all of this together. When I was referencing, I noticed, especially in Rossi's tracks, he's clearly using Tantra or another similar device. This is something that's really important to have in your arsenal, I believe. It retails for a couple of $100 from Plugin Alliance, but I noticed actually last week it was on sale for $30. Unfortunately, that promotion's finished now, but the point is it's worth keeping an eye on these things, as that's a massive saving to get you a really, really useful piece of software. All right, now let's move on to the bass. So the bass is coming from Wavetable, Old Faithful. I really, really like this plugin. So let's take a listen. So pretty cool sound. Here's the MIDI. Pretty intricate MIDI, but essentially we're playing around the root note of E minor and then the perfect fifth with just a few kind of octaves and extra little fills. And while there is some differentiation, you can see by the shape of this that there's a clear motif that we're following. On the end of each second bar, you can see that these notes are overlapping here and here. And this creates a bit of a slide effect. The bassline sound is essentially like a slightly more complex acid sound. You can hear that last one goes whom. Okay, and then let's take a listen to this one. So that one glides up. Having these differences over 4 bars really gives the loop some length and some longevity. Now let's quickly have a look at the synthesis. It's not too complicated actually. I've got a sub and 2 oscillators. I'll just turn those off so we can hear the sub. So the sub is just a sine wave and it's being saturated with this tone knob. I've got a really tight filter, as you can see there. On the filter, I'm using this LFO device, which was from Max for Live, but now they've kind of incorporated it into the audio effects under modulators, LFO. And I assume they've done that to make it more accessible for people who aren't using Max for Live, because it's a really great effect. So what I've done with this, as you can see here, I press this button to map it, and then I select the filter cutoff. Delete that, hit map, and hit the filter frequency. Now I've turned the depth right down. If I turn it up, it's got this crazy LFO, but I want it really low, just subtle. I've added in some just really low, 3%. I've added in some jitter, which is kind of creating this shakiness in the line. If I pull that down, it's more of a straight line. And the shape is set to random. Normally we associate LFOs with a sine wave, something like that. I pull the depth up. You know, that's kind of your LFO thing that you would expect. If I have the offset at the default 50% or 0%, then the frequency is here. But we want the frequency of the filter to be down here. And it's just moving it from its kind of base position slightly all the time. So this just adds a bit of randomization and some movement to make the sound slightly more interesting. Then I'm adding some saturation, some compression, and a bit of chorus. Let's hear. This compressor is just to catch the peaks, which isn't really happening now, but I'm going to do something in a minute which is probably going to cause some peaks. Then I've got some chorus, Tel Chorus LX, one of my favorite free plugins. So you can hear that makes it really wide and interesting in the highs, right? In the higher parts of the bass. But what we're doing here, we don't want our subs to be stereo, we want them to be mono. So I've got this EQ set to mid-side mode. Here we're looking at the sides, and you can see I've cut off everything below kind of 100 Hertz, rolling up to 230 Hertz. And then if we have a look at the mid, I'm cutting it much, much lower, 30. I could probably bring that down a little bit and just roll it off, maybe from 25. Cool, so without that, if you're listening on headphones, you'll hear that there's a bit of stereo in the bass, which we don't want. So this is a really good way to control that and avoid any phasing in your low end. What I actually want to happen with this bass is to have some movement and some modulation. I can't control this cutoff frequency anymore because it's being controlled by the LFO. We've got this modulator of envelope 2, which is being sent to the filter frequency. So I can control it with that. So the way I would use this is I would map it to a MIDI controller and then record in some automation with it. Unfortunately, this is not mappable, but you can see that we've got this global amount, right? So we can turn that down and turn this up. So if I turn this up, all the way up, it goes up to 200%, which I don't want. So I'm going to turn it back down to 100. I'm going to hit Command G to group this. I'm going to hit map on this macro section, grab the global amount, map it to macro 1. Up here in the macro mappings, I want the minimum to be 0% and the maximum to be 100%. Now when I turn this knob, now with this at 100%, I can fine tune the amount here in the matrix. Something like that, 78. Now I'll bring this all the way to the bottom, and that's too low. So I want to fine tune this setting here in the macro mappings. Something there like 28%. So now I can use this knob. Now this is automatically mapped to Ableton Push, or you can map it to a controller or whatever you like. One final thing that I like to do is use this to remove these unused macros. Now we've just got one big one, which we can see. I can reach over here to Ableton Push. Nice. Now, what we're going to do, hit record arm. I'm going to hit this plus button, which is the MIDI overdub. That means that my MIDI is going to stay there. It's going to keep playing. And I'm just going to be able to record automation over the top. I hit A, turn off mapping mode here. Now we're going to go like this. So it's not perfect. You probably want to do that with a bit more purpose and then go in and kind of refine that automation. You can hear now how, when I play this part, has a lot more personality to it, right? So I'm just going to grab some of this automation, pull it down a bit. We don't want it to be going too crazy. Nice subtle movement. All right, let's move on from the bass and check out the melodic elements. So the first thing that comes in is this clavinet. And this is something that I've been hearing for a couple of years now in these like minimal deep tech tracks. A broad range of guys are using this kind of sound. Sidney Charles, Mihai Popovicchio, Rossi, loads of really cool artists. And now let's take a listen to it. So we've got a little riff here which is just kind of going up and down over the E minor scale. You can see here I've got this scale turned on, E minor. That's just showing in green all of the notes that are in the E minor scale which we're working in. I can also hit fold here, and that'll only show me the notes that are being used, or I can hit scale, and that'll only show me the notes in the scale. This is really handy for programming in some MIDI notes. Now, the processing on this, you can hear there's a tantra, pretty recognizable sound. I've got the dry wet turned down a bit, and this is just adding a bit more atmosphere. It's not actually doing too much to the sound. Let's turn it off. So fundamentally it's there. The tantra is just adding a bit of extra kind of secret sauce. Okay, got a glue compressor, EQ, LFO tool, just controlling any peaks and getting it out of the way of the kick and clap, taking out any unneeded low end. So let's have a listen to the sound. I've also got an echo. I've got another LFO, which is assigned to the filter frequency on this clavinet preset, which is just from Ableton Live. If you go into instruments and type in clavinet, you find a few different ones in wavetable, tension, instrument racks. There's a few different bits and pieces in there if you're looking for something in the sound, but you want to try a different variation. This is handy. It's got all the macro racks applied here, and I've just done this LFO similar to last time, just modulating the filter frequency in a random manner. And that's just giving some movement to the sound. So this rack actually has a delay built in, but what I've done is opted for the echo, and we've got it set to 8th notes, dotted, 24%, pretty short feedback. The reason I've done this with the echo is then I can add a bit of reverb here. And it's got this ducking feature. What that means is it's going to duck the delayed sound when the original source sound plays. So this stops things getting too chaotic. Turn the tantra off. So you can hear in this part here where we do a bit of a fill, the delay gets quite chaotic. But with the ducking on, it's still got the ambience of the delay, but you can hear the source sound a bit more clearly. So this is another fun sound, and it really kind of helps to pick up the energy as well when it comes in. Really kind of interesting sound. It's got space in the mix for it, so it's working really well with the rest of the elements. We've got a pad which comes in this break. So this is actually a sample, and I'm adding a bit of filter modulation in here. I've got an envelope on the filter, and I've got this LFO internally giving a bit of movement to the filter frequency. Then after that, I've got this auto filter, which is set to a band pass. So that's cutting off the high and the low above and below the filter frequency. And then I've got an LFO to add some movement to that. So that's essentially just moving it back and forward, similar to what this erosion's doing. So let's just take a listen with and without. Now you can hear the erosion going crazy. Again, I've got an LFO moving the frequency back and forward. So this is giving it that kind of bit crushed quality. Just gives it some kind of like phasey, cool, weird, interesting texture. Cutting out any unneeded low mids, and I've got an LFO tool ducking it. I've got the depth turned down to 60% because I don't want it to be like really pumping, just kind of adding some movement. So that's too much for me, so bring it down. So it's a bit more subtle. I could also grab this envelope here and just add a little bit of a ramp there. Much more subtle. In the break, I've got some automation on the volume of this EQ, which is just pulling it up to create a bit more intensity at the end of this break. Same thing's happening here on this break. Now, This is what I would say is kind of like the hook of the track, a bit of a wow moment, and we're using a very classic house sound, which is the Korg M1. It's the organ-based preset. You're gonna recognize this. Let's have a listen. Such an iconic sound. It's actually used in a few tracks that Rossi's done recently. I've added some processing to help it sit better and to kind of give it a bit more grit. The original sound is quite squeaky clean, so we want to kind of rough it up a bit. Let's take a listen when we remove this chorus filter overdrive. Now add the overdrive. Bit more gritty, and the filter. So I kind of pulled this down to take out some of the highs, but then I'm adding an envelope to give it a bit more pluck. If I take away the envelope, so it's making it kind of punchy, but it's coming through a bit more gritty than the original sound. Some chorus from Tel Chorus LX. It's got the dry wet at about 25%. Some nice subtle chorus. Just really helps it to kind of spread out and ride above the beat. This is such a classic kind of iconic sound. When this type of thing comes into a track, people just love it on the dance floor. It can create a real moment in the club. So that's the melodic elements wrapped. Now let's move on to the vocal. First of all, I'm going to show you these vocal chops. All I've done is taken the original vocal sample, put it into a simpler, and played some MIDI like this. And I do have a tantra on there, but we'll turn it off for now. It's not doing too much. Cool rhythmic kind of pattern. And then with the tantra, just sounding a bit more glitchy, a bit more interesting. Now let's take a listen to the original sample. I'll just grab this, drag it here, pull it out. So it just repeats twice. So we're just going to listen to this bit. Move that body, shake it around. That's it. Cool, kind of throwback hip-hop, hip-house vocal. I noticed that Rossi uses this kind of thing in a lot of his tracks. In Village on Locus has a definite hip-house sample, and it really helps to kind of make a fun, energetic vibe. So what I've done here is taken the audio and just kind of chopped it up to create some interesting vocal fills. Here at this little break. Okay, so then I've got another chop here. So this is just done pretty randomly. I just took little bits of the vocal. I basically just did this, extended the vocal out, and then took little bits here, hold control, boom. Move my body around. So, but maybe we want it to be shorter, so we go like this. We don't want it to click, so we hit A, get the envelope mode, boom, boom. I mean, you can do even more like kind of micro edits like this. And it's really fun. It's kind of hard to get it wrong. So grab a vocal, go to town, play around with it. So I'm basically just doing different variations of chopping it. And then in the break here, we kind of let it go. I'll show you that in a minute after we've looked at the effects. We already looked at this reversed snare. I've just got a standard crash. Simple stuff taken from my sample pack, Underground Shades of House, and a reverse crash taken from Underground Shades of House. This time I've got a bit of processing, just cutting out any lows, and I've got a bit of bit reduction and this flanger. So if I play the original sample, cool, it works, but let's add some bit reduction. Makes it a bit more gritty, and then the flanger kind of really helps to make it a bit more spacey. I'm then sending it to some delay and reverb. So you can see there we're doing more chops, creating more tension before letting it fully play when we cut out all of the drum elements and kind of give it its moment to shine. I also cut out the bass here. You can see there's no MIDI notes, but when we recorded the automation, it put a new clip over there. One more thing that you heard is this, reverse drums. It's a recording of the drums that I've then reversed, added some volume automation, and just kind of created an effect sound out of it. So how do you make that? Pretty easy. I've got this track set to resampling. If I hit input output mode, resampling, what that means is it's going to record the output of the master. I'm just going to turn off this limiter. I'm going to solo the drums and the kick, and then I might find a part without the tambourine, like this here. I record this and hit record. Cool, easy. Now I can crop it here, hit reverse. So what we've got, it's the drums being played backwards. So we don't want the low end, so we can pull that out. And that's all I've done. Creates a really cool, interesting effect that has come from the elements of the track, so it sounds really natural in the groove there. So you can see after this main drop, I'm using it here in the next break, and this time I'm cutting out all of the drums as I kind of bring it into play in full. And we've got another different set of vocal chops. So one other thing that you might have heard is this part here. So what I did, so I took the move part of the vocal, cropped it, and then I took the warp marker. So I think it's at, what does it say, 105? So it's normally something like this, and pulled it out to like this, right? The other thing you can hear on there is I'm using the clip transpose. I've got it starting at 3 semitones above its original pitch, going down to -12 semitones from its original pitch. So in the context, it just kind of creates this really cool glitchy effect. So these vocal chops are like a really cool way to add interest and kind of fun funkiness to your track. I really recommend getting in there and playing around with it. In terms of the arrangement, a lot of these tracks tend to be pretty linear with just like little mini breaks happening regularly. You don't generally find a big extended break like in a tech house track that might be a minute with a really intense build-up. It's more like a kind of drop in energy, cut the kick and bass out, do something a bit interesting for a short period of time, and then bring it all back in and keep it rolling. So as always, the project file is available from the link in the description. It goes to my Patreon, where you can find the project files from all of these how to sound like videos. There's loads of resources there. It's a really great way to have a bit more of an in-depth look at how I've put the tracks together in detail, how the sound design works, that type of thing. So go check it out. Alright guys, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really enjoy making this kind of music. I love kind of the freedom and the experimentation, doing those vocal chops and kind of glitching things up. It's lots of fun and gives you like plenty of freedom to express yourself and just be creative and try different things. If you like this video, then you're probably going to really dig this one that I did on Joko and Chris Tussi's sound. Well, that's it for today. We'll catch you next time. Peace.